Emily Parker had always dreamed of a life far beyond the narrow streets of her small hometown. As a final-year university student, she was no stranger to struggle. Part-time jobs, scholarship applications, and sleepless nights filled with textbooks were her reality. Yet, she carried herself with a quiet ambition, a spark in her eyes that hinted she was destined for something greater. That spark ignited the moment she met James Carter at a charity fashion gala hosted by his family. James, the heir to a highly successful clothing empire, was the embodiment of charm and elegance. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding a confidence that could command any room, he seemed almost unreal to Emily, like a figure she had only ever seen in glossy magazine spreads. Yet, when their eyes met across the crowded hall, a genuine connection sparked, one that neither wealth nor background could suppress. The first conversation flowed effortlessly, as if they had known each other for years. Emily was surprised at how attentive James was, asking about her dreams, her studies, and her family, treating her not as a charity case or a trophy, but as a person of substance. Her heart raced as he offered her a tour of his company, and Emily, still grappling with disbelief, found herself laughing more freely than she had in months. For the first time, she imagined a life where ambition and romance could coexist, where she could rise beyond her circumstances without losing herself. James, on the other hand, found in Emily a refreshing authenticity, someone untouched by the superficial world of wealth and privilege he had been born into. Her sincerity, intelligence, and determination captivated him more than any glamorous socialite ever could. As weeks turned into months, their relationship blossomed into a whirlwind of excitement and affection. James's gestures were grand yet thoughtful, surprise flower deliveries at the university, handwritten notes slipped into Emily's textbooks, and private tours of his design studio where he introduced her to the world he cherished. Despite the glamorous lifestyle he offered, Emily never felt pressured. Instead, she felt seen and valued in ways she had never known. Friends and family on both sides approved, admiring the seeming harmony between ambition and love. For Emily, who had spent so long navigating hardship alone, the experience was intoxicating. She reveled in the stolen moments, late-night drives through the city, quiet dinners on rooftops overlooking sparkling skylines, and whispered dreams of a future together. Yet, beneath the romance and the glimmering surface, a subtle tension lingered. Emily, ambitious by nature, felt the pull of opportunity and the tantalizing possibility of a life even bigger than what James could provide. But at this stage, those thoughts were fleeting, buried beneath the intensity of first love and the intoxicating certainty that James was entirely devoted to her. In his arms, she felt powerful yet protected, a rare combination that made her heart swell with hope. The foundation of trust and passion they built in those early days seemed unshakable, setting the stage for a love story that, at first glance, looked perfect, an ideal pairing of ambition and affection, wealth and grit, dreams and reality. Little did Emily know, the seemingly perfect balance between her ambitions and her romance with James was only the calm before the storm. The world outside their bubble, full of temptation, opportunity, and unforeseen challenges, was quietly waiting to test the strength of their bond, and the depth of Emily's ambitions. Emily Parker had always dreamed of everything seemed perfect between Emily and James for the first 2 years. Their relationship was the envy of friends, a storybook romance celebrated at family gatherings and social events alike. Emily had never felt so secure, so adored, and so certain that she had everything she ever wanted. Yet, life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and for Emily, the first crack in her idyllic world arrived in the form of Ryan Mitchell, a fellow student in her final year. Ryan was the complete opposite of James in many ways, reckless, charming in a devilish sort of way, and unapologetically indulgent. A wealthy heir from another influential family, he had grown up accustomed to taking what he wanted and never answering to anyone. At first, Emily resisted the obvious thrill of Ryan's attention. He was, after all, just a classmate, someone she barely knew beyond the occasional shared lecture or group project. But Ryan was persistent. His compliments were flattering, his wit intoxicating, and slowly, a subtle friendship began to form, one that Emily told herself was harmless, strictly casual, and without consequences. The turning point was gradual. Ryan seemed to understand Emily in ways even James didn't, noticing her smallest insecurities, joking with her in private, and encouraging her ambitious dreams in ways that felt thrillingly dangerous. Emily, though deeply in love with James, started to feel a pull she couldn't fully explain, a sense of excitement and freedom that contrasted sharply with the comfortable devotion she enjoyed at home. The friendship evolved in whispered messages late at night, unplanned coffee breaks, and private study sessions that stretched into hours of laughter and confessions. Emily, who had always been ambitious and daring, began to rationalize the emotional closeness, convincing herself that it was harmless as long as she didn't cross a line. But temptation has a way of blurring boundaries. One evening, after yet another private dinner arranged under the guise of a study meeting, Ryan confessed his feelings in a way that left Emily shocked, guilty, and, against her better judgment, intrigued. The rush of attention, the thrill of the forbidden, and the intoxicating charm of Ryan made her heart waver. Emily's ambition, her desire for something bigger, more exciting, and more thrilling than the life she already had, started to outweigh the loyalty she felt toward James. In a moment of weakness, one that would set off a chain reaction of betrayal and heartbreak, she accepted Ryan's confession. From that night onward, a secret affair began, concealed beneath the perfect life she maintained with James. For a full year, Emily walked a razor's edge, juggling two lives. With James, she was the devoted girlfriend, the partner who laughed at his jokes, attended gala events, and cherished every moment of their shared future. With Ryan, she experienced a forbidden thrill, a taste of power and seduction she had never known. Each encounter was a gamble, each message a temptation. And while Emily told herself she could control the situation, a gnawing anxiety always lingered, an awareness that one mistake could shatter everything she had worked so hard to build. The duality of her life was exhausting but addictive, and Emily, blinded by ambition and desire, failed to see how dangerously close she was to the edge. Little did she know, James's unwavering love and intuition were quietly observing the cracks. While Emily believed she was the one orchestrating the story, the true storm was only just beginning, one that would test loyalties, reveal hidden truths, and challenge every notion of love, ambition, and betrayal she had ever held. For months, James had sensed something was off. Emily's laughter no longer felt as genuine, her excuses for late nights became increasingly flimsy, and there was a tension in the way she avoided eye contact when he mentioned Ryan casually. James, despite being deeply in love and often blind to faults, had a sharp intuition, one that now screamed warnings he could no longer ignore. He began quietly observing, piecing together fragments of conversations, subtle hints, and the faint scent of betrayal that clung to Emily's actions. Instead of confronting her impulsively, James decided to investigate calmly, determined to understand the truth before making any decisions that could shatter their relationship forever. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. Ryan, unaware of James's suspicions, arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing a mutual academic project. James, knowing exactly what was happening, insisted on joining, masking his intent with casual confidence. The tension in the room was immediate, electric, and suffocating. Ryan, usually cocky and untouchable, felt a subtle unease in James's controlled gaze. James spoke first, his voice low but firm, carefully choosing words that revealed nothing yet implied everything. "Emily speaks highly of you. I hope that respect is mutual." Ryan smirked, masking a flicker of discomfort with charm, but the power dynamics had shifted. James was no longer just a bystander, he was a force that Ryan hadn't anticipated. For the first time, Ryan's playful dominance wavered. The conversation, seemingly casual, became a silent battle of wills. James did not yell, did not threaten, but every word was a calculated probe, testing Ryan's intentions and the depth of Emily's involvement. Ryan's confidence began to crack under James's quiet intensity. Though Emily sat beside them, pretending calm and innocence, a storm brewed behind her eyes, fear, guilt, and the growing realization that her carefully maintained facade was collapsing. James could see it all, the subtle flinches, the micro-expressions, the tiny cracks in Emily's composure. Every gesture spoke louder than words, and James absorbed them all silently, his heart aching with betrayal and disbelief. Ryan, sensing he was losing control, tried to charm his way out, laughing off implications and subtly twisting the conversation to cast doubt on James. But James's intelligence and patience rendered these tactics useless. He remained poised, a silent but powerful presence, conveying that he knew more than he said. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone that the dynamics had shifted irrevocably. Ryan, though outwardly confident, now understood that James was not to be underestimated. And Emily, caught between two men, realized for the first time that her double life had consequences far more serious than she had imagined. As James walked away, the weight of betrayal pressed heavily on his chest. He did not raise his voice, did not cause a scene. Instead, he left Ryan with a single, piercing look, a silent promise that justice would come, and that he would not let Emily's deception slide. Meanwhile, Emily felt a growing panic. The thrill of secrecy that had once excited her now twisted into terror. She could no longer pretend, could no longer control the narrative. The first confrontation had ignited a chain reaction that she could not stop. And as James disappeared from sight, Emily understood, with a sinking heart, that her choices had set a storm in motion, one that would strip away illusions, destroy facades, and leave everyone involved to confront the harsh, unyielding truth. After that first tense confrontation, James couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the depth of her betrayal. Every memory of their 2-year relationship, her laughter, the late-night talks, the shared dreams of building a life together, felt tainted, like a perfect painting smeared with mud. But what shocked him most wasn't just the infidelity, it was the cold calculation behind it. Emily wasn't just lost in desire, she had planned, manipulated, and taken advantage of his love without remorse. James, fueled by a mix of heartbreak and righteous anger, knew that confronting her alone would never suffice. She needed to see the consequences of her choices, and he needed someone he could trust to help him navigate the storm. That someone was Ryan. Ryan, for his part, had always enjoyed the thrill of conquest and power, but he had never encountered someone like Emily before. At first, he had thought it was a game, a harmless flirtation, a distraction. But as James calmly recounted the evidence he had gathered, the subtle lies, the hidden messages, the inconsistencies in Emily's stories, Ryan's amusement gave way to disbelief. He realized that Emily had not only manipulated him but had also done so with a cold precision that betrayed a deeper ambition. Suddenly, Ryan's cocky, playful demeanor faded, replaced by the seriousness of someone who recognized that they were both pawns in her game. And just like that, an unspoken alliance formed between the two men. They met in a quiet, dimly lit cafe the next evening, voices low and eyes locked in mutual understanding. "She thought she could play both of us," James said, his jaw tight, hands gripping his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. Ryan nodded slowly, the first flicker of respect appearing in his eyes. "She underestimated you, and me," he replied. "She thought we'd just let her get away with it. But she miscalculated." The air between them was electric, charged with the intensity of shared betrayal and the beginnings of a plan. They began to map out Emily's deceptions, piece by piece, retracing the moments when she had twisted reality to her advantage. James felt a grim satisfaction as he realized he was no longer alone in his anger. Ryan, who had always been reckless, now offered strategic thinking and connections James didn't possess. Together, they began to strategize, not with violence, but with precision. They would expose Emily for who she truly was, ensure that her lies could no longer hide in the shadows, and make certain that the world saw the consequences of her ambition and betrayal. Emily, who had so carefully curated her image of innocence and charm, would soon face the truth she had ignored. Even as they planned, both men felt the pangs of residual pain. James thought of the intimate moments he had shared with Emily, the trust he had placed in her, and the moments when she had smiled at Ryan with a secret he would never have known. Ryan thought of his own pride, the thrill of chasing what he wanted, and how Emily had manipulated that to her benefit. Their personal losses became fuel for the mission ahead, transforming sorrow into determination, heartbreak into strategy. By the end of the night, their alliance was sealed not by friendship, but by a shared purpose, to reveal Emily's true nature to the world, and to ensure that she could never hurt anyone the way she had hurt them. As they parted ways, a silent understanding hung in the air. They would act, and they would act soon. Emily, oblivious to the storm gathering just beyond her carefully constructed life, remained confident, playful, untouchable. But for James and Ryan, nothing would ever be the same again. The game had changed, and this time, they were the players with all the cards in hand. Emily's empire of lies was about to crumble, and there would be no mercy for the architect of her own downfall. The confrontation came sooner than Emily had expected. She had spent weeks carefully constructing her facade, convincing herself that she could keep James in the dark, that Ryan would remain loyal to her lies, that the consequences of her ambition would somehow pass her by. But reality had a way of catching up, and the truth had a stubborn habit of breaking through even the most delicate illusions. One evening, James invited Ryan to meet him privately, and without warning, Emily's carefully balanced world began to unravel. When Emily arrived at the cafe, she sensed something was wrong immediately. James sat across from Ryan, both men calm, composed, but with eyes that burned with the intensity of betrayal. Emily tried her usual charm, her practiced smile, but it faltered under the weight of the evidence they laid out before her. Texts, photos, eyewitness accounts, and subtle patterns of her deceit, they had catalogued everything meticulously. "Emily," James said softly, his voice steady but edged with pain, "we know everything." Her first instinct was to deny. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice slightly trembling, betraying the panic she desperately tried to hide. But Ryan's expression, usually playful and dismissive, was now sharp, almost predatory. "Don't bother lying," he said. "We've got it all. Every secret, every moment you thought you were clever. We know what you've done." Emily's heart raced. She had manipulated so many situations, spun so many stories, and yet, here she was, trapped by the very men she had thought she could control. In a desperate bid for survival, she began to fabricate excuses. "It wasn't me," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Ryan forced me. He made me do it. I didn't want to hurt James, I swear." She turned to Ryan, hoping for some backing, some sign that he would validate her version of events. But Ryan simply stared at her with a mix of disgust and disbelief. "Stop," he said coldly. "We both know that's a lie. You made your choices, Emily. Own them." James's face remained unreadable, but the pain in his eyes cut deeper than any words could. Emily's lies were collapsing, her defenses crumbling. She had underestimated both men, not only their perception but their unwillingness to be deceived. For the first time, Emily felt powerless, exposed, and terrified. All her ambition, all her plotting, all her dreams of manipulating love and loyalty to serve her own desires, everything was slipping through her fingers like sand. The cafe fell silent, the weight of truth pressing down on her. James finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You've had a year to enjoy your games, Emily. But it ends now. This is your reckoning." Emily tried to sob, tried to appeal to his lingering love, but it was no use. The betrayal was too deep, the evidence too clear. Ryan leaned forward, adding a final, cutting remark, "And don't think you can twist it anymore. We're done playing your games." In that moment, Emily realized the full scope of her isolation. Her carefully curated life of charm, manipulation, and ambition had collapsed, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. James, the man she had loved and betrayed, was no longer blinded by affection. Ryan, the man she had sought to control for pleasure and excitement, now saw her as nothing more than a cautionary tale. And Emily, who had thought herself untouchable, now faced a storm she could not escape. Her tears were real now, but they could not wash away the choices she had made. She had played with fire, and the fire had burned everything she loved. James and Ryan, bound now by shared betrayal and a growing sense of justice, walked away together, leaving Emily alone in the wreckage of her own making. The empire of lies she had built was crumbling, and for the first time, she understood the true cost of ambition and deceit. Emily thought she had regained control. 2 months had passed since the cafe confrontation, and James, still deeply in love, had cautiously allowed her back into his life. They were on a weekend getaway at a luxurious downtown hotel, a place James had chosen to celebrate their tentative reconciliation. Emily smiled, pretending to be grateful, masking the simmering ambition and desire for thrill that still lingered beneath her carefully cultivated facade. She had already called Ryan, under the pretense of needing advice on a work project, and arranged for him to meet her at the hotel later that evening. It was all part of her plan, her own little game, one she believed she could play flawlessly. The hotel room was spacious, elegant, with soft golden lighting that bathed everything in warmth. James had left briefly to take an urgent call for the company, leaving Emily alone. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with excitement. She knew the risk, yet the thrill of her secret rendezvous with Ryan made her heart race. Ryan arrived quietly, slipping into the room with a mischievous grin, his charm as dangerous as ever. Emily's smile widened, a combination of relief and audacity. She thought she could manage it, that James would never suspect anything, that she could continue this dangerous double life. They were only moments into their embrace when the door swung open. James had returned earlier than expected, his eyes immediately locking on the scene before him. Time seemed to freeze. The warmth of the room turned icy, the soft golden lighting now casting harsh shadows over the betrayal unfolding before him. Emily froze, Ryan stiffened, and James's face transformed from shock to a quiet, simmering anger that made the room feel smaller, suffocating. Emily's mouth opened, words stuck in her throat. She tried to cover, tried to lie, James, but the scene was undeniable. The very room they had shared so many private moments in, the same bed they had once laughed and loved on, had become the stage for her deception. Ryan, realizing the inevitability of the moment, pushed Emily slightly aside, his smug grin faltering under James's piercing gaze. James didn't yell, didn't storm, he simply stood there, his jaw tight, eyes glistening with a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. Emily collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down her face, her bravado evaporating instantly. I can explain, she whimpered, her voice trembling, pleading for mercy that would not come. Ryan tried to intervene, but James raised a hand, stopping him. No. Just stop, James said, his voice low but deadly calm. Every word carried the weight of betrayal, the weight of love broken too many times. Emily's excuses, lies, and justifications, all of them, fell flat in the presence of raw truth. The room was heavy with tension, the once comforting luxury of the hotel now suffocating in its reminder of trust shattered. Emily's ambition, her need for thrill, her craving for control, they had all led her here, to this moment of ultimate exposure. James, heartbroken yet composed, turned away, unable to watch her any longer. Ryan, for all his charm and daring, knew the game had ended. Emily was left alone, tears streaking her face, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, the consequences of her greed and betrayal finally inescapable. In that moment, Emily understood the full scope of her choices. The thrill of deceit, the dangerous allure of manipulation, the temptation of forbidden desire, they had all brought her to ruin. And as James walked out, leaving her in the silence of the hotel room, she realized that some betrayals could never be forgiven, some hearts never fully repaired, and some lessons, no matter how painful, were learned too late. The next morning, Emily woke up with a heavy, uneasy feeling in her chest. Her reckless actions at the hotel the night before had been exposed, and she knew there was no hiding from the consequences anymore. Word had already begun to spread, whispers echoing through the hallways of her university, as students and faculty alike caught wind of the scandal. She tried to hold her head high, convincing herself that she could still spin the narrative, but deep down, the growing panic gnawed at her. By mid-morning, she saw them. James and Ryan were standing at the school gates, a stark contrast to the casual crowd around them. James, impeccably dressed, his expression calm but deadly, exuded a quiet authority that immediately silenced anyone nearby. Ryan stood beside him, looking almost playful, but the tension in his eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. Emily's heart raced, she had never felt more vulnerable. She tried to slip past them, to avoid confrontation, but the moment she stepped closer, James's gaze pinned her in place. "You thought you could get away with it," James said quietly, but his voice carried like a whip. Students nearby turned their attention, sensing the brewing drama. Emily opened her mouth, tried to explain, but the words faltered. Ryan stepped forward, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a firm, commanding presence. "No excuses," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's time you faced what you've done." James reached out and lightly pushed Emily, not violently, but enough to make her stumble and almost lose her balance. The crowd gasped, and cameras from students' phones were already recording. Rumors quickly became reality. Emily's humiliation was being documented live, shared instantly on social media. Videos and photos flooded every platform, the captions merciless, #betrayal, #cheating exposed, #lesson learned. Within minutes, Emily's private scandal had gone viral, her face and mistake circulating across networks, comments ranging from outrage to ridicule. Emily fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, it's not what it looks like," she cried, her voice trembling. But no one was listening. The evidence was undeniable, and James and Ryan had orchestrated it perfectly. They weren't there to humiliate for fun, they were there to teach a lesson. A lesson in honesty, in loyalty, and in the consequences of ambition unchecked by conscience. Teachers arrived, witnessing the commotion, and Emily was promptly escorted to the administration office. The scandal would not be ignored, she faced suspension, and the school made it clear that her actions had jeopardized her place at the university. The combination of social media outrage and administrative consequences made it clear, there would be no easy way out. In that moment, Emily felt the full weight of her choices. The thrill she had once sought in lies and deception had evaporated, leaving only shame and despair. Her future at the university was now uncertain, and the name she had tried to build for herself lay in ruins across social media. James and Ryan stood together, watching quietly, their expressions firm but without cruelty. They were simply witnesses to the inevitable downfall of someone who had refused to respect love or loyalty. As Emily was led away, she realized this was only the beginning. Her dreams, ambitions, and carefully crafted image had all crumbled in a single day. The world outside the school gates had turned against her, and the consequences of betrayal were more than she could have imagined. Her choices had led her here, to a moment of public humiliation and irreversible shame, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of her own ambition. After the scandal, Emily's life spiraled out of control faster than she could have ever imagined. The viral videos, the cruel comments, and the relentless gossip had destroyed any sense of safety or reputation she once had. She left her hometown in a haze of shame and desperation, boarding a flight with only a small suitcase and a heart full of fear. She told herself that a new city would be a fresh start, that she could somehow rebuild her life, but the past, as always, had a way of following her. In the new city, Emily struggled to find her footing. Jobs were scarce, and the moment her background surfaced, thanks to the internet's unforgiving memory, she was turned away from every opportunity. Her pride, once her driving force, was now a fragile shell. She wandered through the streets, her ambition turning into desperation, as hunger and loneliness gnawed at her resolve. It was in this state of vulnerability that she met a man who seemed to offer a helping hand. He was charming, well-dressed, and spoke with confidence about opportunities, only for someone like her, someone smart, ambitious, and beautiful. At first, Emily was skeptical. Her instincts screamed at her not to trust, but years of privilege and longing for recognition clouded her judgment. She agreed to meet him, thinking it was her chance to regain some control over her life. He welcomed her into a luxurious apartment, a space that seemed too perfect, too inviting. Slowly, he introduced her to a network of people who promised financial support, career connections, and a life far above her current misery. Emily felt hope rising, a dangerous, blinding hope. It wasn't long before the truth revealed itself. The network wasn't a legitimate business. It was a trap, a carefully constructed web of exploitation, and Emily had walked right into it. At first subtle, the manipulations grew more insistent, her autonomy stripped away one choice at a time. The man who had seemed kind now demanded her obedience in ways that made her stomach turn. Every plea for freedom was met with threats or emotional manipulation. Her options dwindled until the cold reality settled in, she was trapped. Emily's heart pounded every time she considered escape, but every attempt was thwarted. The city that once promised freedom and opportunity had turned into a cage, and her ambition, which had driven her to chase a wealthy lifestyle and love, had become her undoing. She thought of James and Ryan, of the life she had betrayed and lost, and a sharp pang of regret cut through her despair. But regret could not rescue her. The world outside had moved on, and she was left alone, confined, a victim of her own choices. Days blurred into nights, each one a repeat of manipulation, fear, and hopeless longing. She thought about the fame she had once craved, now replaced with infamy and humiliation. She remembered the hotel room, the lies, and the betrayal, and the memory tormented her endlessly. There was no redemption here, only survival, and Emily realized that survival was no longer enough for her. She longed for freedom, but freedom seemed as unattainable as the life she had once imagined. In this dark chapter, Emily's ambition, once her greatest strength, had become the very force that led her to ruin. Her dreams of wealth, love, and status had been stripped away, leaving nothing but the harsh reality of exploitation and despair. Far from home, alone, and trapped in a life she could never have imagined, Emily finally understood the price of her choices, the full cost of her betrayal and ambition, a cost she would carry for the rest of her life. After the heartbreak and betrayal, James found himself standing alone in the same penthouse where he had once believed love would last forever. The memories of Emily's betrayal haunted him, but there was no room for indulgence in self-pity. He had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to repair, and yet, somehow, he carried a quiet strength within him, a resilience forged from love, heartbreak, and survival. Ryan, too, had felt the weight of Emily's choices. At first, anger had consumed him, a fiery mixture of resentment and disbelief. But over time, he realized that harboring bitterness would only chain him to the past. He and James, once rivals in love, discovered a surprising camaraderie in their shared experience. They spent long nights talking about everything, ambition, betrayal, and the future they wanted to build. Slowly, a bond of genuine friendship and trust grew between them, one stronger than either could have imagined. Together, they began to rebuild what had been shattered. James threw himself into his fashion empire with renewed focus, determined to create a legacy defined not by heartbreak, but by success and integrity. Ryan, always the free spirit, channeled his energy into philanthropic ventures and business projects that mattered to him, no longer chasing empty thrills but meaningful accomplishments. Their lives, once derailed by Emily's ambition, now moved forward with purpose and clarity. It wasn't long before both men found themselves opening up to love again, but this time, cautiously, intentionally. James met Sophia, a designer with her own dreams and ambitions, someone who respected him as much as he respected her. Their connection was different from what he had experienced with Emily. It was honest, grounded, and built on mutual trust. Ryan, meanwhile, found solace and excitement with Olivia, a spirited entrepreneur who matched his energy and zest for life. With her, he laughed again, freely and fully, without the shadows of betrayal looming over him. As the months passed, James and Ryan often reflected on their past, on Emily, on heartbreak, and on the lessons they had learned. They realized that the pain they endured had been necessary to guide them toward people who truly valued and respected them. There was a sense of justice in that, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that their resilience had led to genuine happiness. The scars of betrayal remained, but they had transformed from wounds into reminders of their strength. They celebrated milestones together, not just in business, but in life. Their friendship deepened, cemented by the shared understanding of what it meant to be hurt and yet rise above it. The world they had feared might be cruel and unforgiving had, in fact, offered them a second chance. And unlike the past, this time, they embraced it fully, without hesitation, without compromise. In the end, James and Ryan had found a form of redemption. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real. They had been tested, deceived, and broken, but through resilience, understanding, and trust, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and genuinely happy. Life, they realized, was not about the fleeting allure of ambition or the pain of betrayal. It was about the people who stand by you, the love that is honest, and the courage to start over, no matter how dark the past. And so, James and Ryan, once rivals, now friends for life, stepped into a future filled with hope, laughter, and the kind of happiness that only comes when you've truly earned it. Emily's world had collapsed. The moment James had walked in on her betrayal, her carefully constructed life had started to unravel, and there was no one to catch her fall. The penthouse, once a symbol of luxury and desire, now felt like a prison, each corner echoing with the weight of her choices. Humiliated, exposed, and alone, she had nowhere to run, not from the law, not from the public, and certainly not from the consequences of her own ambition. Word of her betrayal spread like wildfire across social media, igniting scandal after scandal. Former friends distanced themselves, brands she had hoped to collaborate with pulled out, and her reputation, painstakingly built over years, crumbled overnight. Every post, every picture, every smile she had flaunted now felt like a lie, a reminder of her deceit. She had thought her ambition would lift her higher, but it had only led her to a cliff she couldn't climb back from. The humiliation escalated when the university expelled her. Walking past her classmates, she felt the piercing stares and whispered judgments. People she had once called peers now stared at her with disgust, as if she were a cautionary tale come to life. Her dreams of fame, love, and influence had all been built on manipulation and falsehoods, and now they lay in ruins. She had no one to blame but herself. Her family, once her support system, had turned cold. They were ashamed, fearful of being associated with her downfall. Her father, who had sacrificed so much for her education, shook his head in silent disappointment. Her mother's tears were a daily reminder that no amount of ambition could replace integrity. Alone in the house she had grown up in, Emily finally realized that her hunger for wealth and attention had destroyed the very people she claimed to love, and herself along with them. As she spiraled further, Emily fell into the dangerous world Ryan and James had feared she might. Predators noticed her vulnerability, and she was lured into situations from which she could not escape. Every choice she had made to manipulate and exploit others had led her here. The bright future she had imagined was nothing but a shadowed memory, replaced by fear, entrapment, and regret. Meanwhile, James and Ryan were thriving. Their friendship, forged in shared pain, had grown into something unbreakable. James and Sophia traveled the world, expanding his fashion empire, their relationship grounded in trust and genuine love. Ryan and Olivia's laughter filled rooms, their partnership adventurous and full of life. Both men often reflected on the past, but instead of bitterness, they felt gratitude, for the lessons Emily's betrayal had taught them, and for the happiness they had found by rising above it. One night, Ryan and James shared a toast overlooking the city skyline, the lights twinkling like stars. "We survived her," Ryan said, a smirk of triumph in his eyes. James laughed, clinking his glass with his friends. "No, we survived ourselves," he corrected. They knew the truth, the heartbreak had been a gift in disguise. It had forced them to discover their resilience, their boundaries, and ultimately, the people who were truly worthy of their hearts. Emily, in the shadows of her ruined life, could only watch as the world she had coveted passed her by. Fame, fortune, love, all the things she had manipulated to obtain were now forever out of reach. And as James and Ryan walked into a bright future filled with laughter and hope, Emily realized that ambition without integrity is nothing but a hollow cage, and the price for betrayal is far higher than she had ever imagined. In the end, life had rewarded those who had stayed true and punished the one who had lied. And in that stark contrast, the story of love, betrayal, and redemption reached its final, unforgettable climax. Emily's fall from grace had become a story people whispered about with a mix of shock and fascination. But even in her ruined state, she hadn't fully learned her lesson. She was desperate, haunted by the memories of James and Ryan, two men whose lives she had once tried to manipulate, now thriving without her. Her pride, once so sharp and unyielding, had turned into a fragile mask of denial. She refused to admit how low she had sunk, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, she could regain control. Life had become a constant battle for survival. Jobs rejected her, doors closed in her face, and every attempt to rebuild ended in failure. The social media scandals had permanently tainted her reputation, making even ordinary interactions perilous. Strangers recognized her, some pointing fingers, others whispering insults. The world she had once believed she could conquer was now a relentless reminder of her mistakes. But Emily, ever the ambitious schemer, couldn't stop herself from plotting. She reached out to connections she had made in the fashion world, trying to manipulate her way back into power. Every call, every message, was another failed attempt, another rejection. Even the wealthy and powerful people she had once charmed now saw her as toxic, dangerous, and untrustworthy. Her charm, once irresistible, now felt like a hollow echo. Meanwhile, James and Ryan continued to thrive. Their businesses were booming, their friendships unbreakable. Every new collection James launched was met with rave reviews. Ryan's investments grew exponentially. Both men had learned the value of loyalty, integrity, and trust, the very qualities Emily had squandered. And while they occasionally thought of her, their reflections were tinged with gratitude rather than bitterness. Emily's betrayal had taught them resilience, patience, and the importance of choosing the right people to love and trust. Emily's desperation finally led her into a dangerous underworld she had never imagined. Predators sensed her vulnerability, and she was trapped in situations that made escape impossible. The luxury and power she had craved now existed only in her memories, replaced by fear and manipulation. Each day was a fight to survive, and every misstep reminded her of the choices she had made. The ambition that once drove her had become her curse. In the shadows of her ruined life, Emily finally began to understand the consequences of betrayal. Ambition without conscience, charm without integrity, and love without loyalty had led her to this place. She had lost everything, her dreams, her freedom, her future. And as she watched from the margins, James and Ryan's lives were a stark reminder of what she had sacrificed. Even in her despair, there was one cruel lesson she couldn't escape: the world rewards those who act with honesty and punishes those who deceive. James and Ryan's happiness, built on truth and trust, shone brighter because of her absence. Emily's story became a cautionary tale, a viral legend of ambition, betrayal, and the price of moral failure. In the end, Emily was left alone, her ambition turned to ash. And the world moved on without her, leaving her to face the full weight of the choices that had destroyed everything she had ever wanted. Emily's story had reached its final chapter, though she hadn't realized it herself. By now, she was a ghost of the ambitious young woman who had once believed she could manipulate love, power, and fortune to her own advantage. Every choice she had made, every lie she had told, had come full circle, leaving her isolated, exposed, and utterly broken. Meanwhile, James and Ryan had moved forward in ways Emily could never have imagined. Their friendship, forged in the fires of betrayal, had become unbreakable. They laughed together, celebrated milestones, and built lives of success and authenticity. James's fashion brand had grown internationally, gaining respect for its creativity and ethical practices. Ryan, who had once been seen as a reckless playboy, had matured into a savvy entrepreneur with a sharp eye for opportunity. Their love for life and loyalty to one another had triumphed where Emily's deceit had failed. Emily, desperate for some form of control or recognition, attempted one last scheme. She reached out to former contacts, tried to infiltrate circles that she once belonged to, and even attempted to reconnect with James, but it was too late. Everyone she tried to manipulate had already learned from her treachery and ignored her pleas. The world she had once sought to dominate had permanently shut its doors. Her situation worsened as she was forced deeper into a dangerous underground network she could never escape. Emily became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones online and offline, a story of ambition without morality, charm without integrity, and love betrayed. Every social media post, every viral clip reminded her that the life she had desired was forever out of reach. James and Ryan's triumphs were highlighted in glossy magazines and trending headlines, a stark contrast to Emily's decline. They had discovered not only business success but also a deeper understanding of trust, loyalty, and genuine love. Emily's betrayal had unintentionally strengthened them, and the world rewarded them for their patience and integrity. In the rare moments Emily reflected on her life, she realized too late that her pursuit of instant gratification had blinded her to the value of honesty and commitment. Her ambition, which had once seemed like a path to greatness, had become her prison. Every dream she had chased was now a distant memory, and every manipulation had led her deeper into despair. The final lesson was harsh but clear: deceit and selfishness might provide temporary gain, but only truth and loyalty lead to lasting happiness. Emily had lost everything, from her career to her reputation to her freedom. And in the end, she had no one to blame but herself. James and Ryan, on the other hand, continued their journey, wiser, stronger, and happier than ever. Their friendship became legendary, their love stories inspiring millions, and Emily's name became synonymous with warning, not admiration. As Emily vanished from the public eye, the world moved on. The story of betrayal, ambition, and ultimate justice became viral, not just as gossip, but as a powerful lesson about choices, consequences, and the real cost of moral failure.